classification of joints. We're going to go through the first four sections, I believe. First three sections. Then we'll look at a couple of sections together, and then wrap it up. So there will be only three videos with this chapter. So we're talking about joints, and joints are also called articulations. They're places where two or more bones meet, and their function is to give the skeleton mobility, but at the same time, they're structures that are going to help hold the skeleton together. So, like many things, we can classify them either structurally or functionally, and we'll look first at structural classification. So there are three types of articulations or joints based on what material is holding them together and whether a cavity is present. So those would be fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial. Functionally, we've got classifications based on the amount of movement that's allowed. So just because two bones come together doesn't mean that those bones move. So in a synarthros, we have an immovable joint. Our skull bones held together with sutures. That's a good example of a synarthrotic joint. We have amphitherotic joints that allow some movement. And then we have diathrotic joints that allow for free movement within the structure of the joint itself. So not completely free movement. And the structural classifications tend to be more clear-cut, so that's what we're going to focus on. That's what your author is going to focus on in this. So a fibrous joint is a bones that are joined by dense fibrous connective tissues. There's no joint cavity between them. They are mostly immovable. That mobility will depend on the length of those connective tissue fibers. They're a little longer. Sometimes they allow a little bit of movement, but most are going to be synarthrotic. And the three types we'll look at are sutures, syndesmos, and gomphos. So sutures you saw when you looked at the bones of the skull. They are rigid interlocking joints of the skull. They do allow for some growth during youth. They contain short connective tissue fibers that expand a little. By middle age, those sutures begin to ossify and fuse and become completely immovable joints to join the skull into one unit that's protecting the brain. So those closed, immovable sutures are synaptoses. Syndesmos, the bones are connected by ligaments and bands of fibrous tissue. The fiber lengths vary, so movement varies. The short ones that offer little or no movement would be, for instance, in the inferior tibiofibular joint in the leg, whereas longer fibers can offer a larger amount of movement. And when we talked about those interosseous membrane between the radius and the ulna, that was a good example of those. Gomphos are peg and socket joints, and the only example we have of those are teeth in our alveolar sockets, but it's important for you to remember that those are joints. There's a fibrous connection in the form of the periodontal ligament that holds the tooth in the socket. Next, we have cartilaginous joints. Here, the bones are united by cartilage. Like the fibrous joints, there's no joint cavity. They are not highly movable, but they do have two types, the synchondrose and the symphysis. The synchondroses, there's a bar or plate of hyaline cartilage uniting the two bones. They are synarthrotic, immovable, almost all. Temporary epiphyseal plate in our long bones would be an example of a synchondrose. That's going to become bone tissue after the plate closes. In the cartilage of the first rib with the manubrium. Excuse me, I had to yawn. The cartilage of the first rib with the manubrium of the sternum is another example. A symphysis is fibrocartilage instead of hyaline cartilage. It's going to unite the bone and the symphysis joint. There is hyaline cartilage present. That's articulate cartilage on the bony surfaces. The symphysis are strong, slightly movable, so amphitheatic joints. The intervertebral joints would be examples of these, and the pubic symphysis between the pubic bones in the pelvis is another good example. All right, I am going to stop there. 4 and 5 are the bulk of this unit, and they're going to be a little longer.